Hey, what's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I'll be showing you guys a Clawbringer build that can absolutely destroy everything in max Chaos level 20 content and is a ton of fun to use. As I'm sure many of you guys know, Clawbringer can be a bit difficult to set up, and I imagine there's a good bit of you that are having trouble getting to Chaos level 20 while playing Clawbringer, so that was kind of the main reason that I wanted to make this video. This build does mainly take advantage of Spore Warden, so it's not much of a main Clawbringer build. However, I just wanted to get this video out there for you Clawbringer mains to give you a build that is still super strong. And in the upcoming days, I'll be working on a build that is primarily a Clawbringer setup. It'll just take me a bit to perfectly set up since Clawbringer's tree is a bit more difficult to fully take advantage of, and there's a lot of testing that I have to do there. If you guys have any recommendations for that build, feel free to leave it down in the comments. But in the meantime, this current build is more than enough to be able to completely breeze through all forms of content. Before I get into the video, I want to give a big thanks to today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is an extremely convenient meal service plan that ships super affordable, pre-portioned, amazing ingredients straight to your door, so you can cook a fantastically delicious meal super quickly without the hassle of going to the store, buying tons of ingredients for just one meal, often forgetting something, or having to buy such a large portion of ingredients just for one meal when you may end up not even using it again. That's honestly what's perfect about HelloFresh, is that you just don't have to worry about any of that. The meals are portioned perfectly, so all you have to do is just take the ingredients out of the box and have a blast cooking these very easy to follow step-by-step recipes. With over 50 weekly options, there are plenty of delicious dishes to choose from, so no matter what your health goals are, HelloFresh has you covered. There's so many different options to choose from that you'll literally just never get bored of having the same meals over and over again, and with the prices averaging out to less than $10 a meal, HelloFresh is an absolute no-brainer. Personally for me, being able to cook a super tasty meal every single night without having to worry about going to the store, getting all the ingredients, stressing out about like if meat and vegetables are going bad, what I have in my fridge, etc., is just an absolute godsend, and I couldn't recommend it anymore, especially with the super affordable prices and the meals just being consistently really tasty. If you want to get your diet back on track without having to worry about wasting time and stressing yourself out, use my link or go to HelloFresh.com and use code POGNIC216 for up to 16 free meals plus 3 surprise gifts across 6 HelloFresh boxes plus free shipping. Thanks again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. Forgot to mention this, like always, in terms of the hero stats, you always want to max out your crit damage. I went into spell cooldown because I'm using Buffmeister just because I like it, but if you want flat extra damage, status damage would be your best bet. Crit chance, I'm still not 100% certain if it actually does anything or not. If you're using your skills a lot while leveling, you could certainly go into skill cooldown, but at endgame our skill cooldown rate is low enough that we do not need to spec into this at all, and I prefer just getting the flat crit damage, and then the status damage, and then spell cooldown for higher Buffmeister uptime. So let's just get right into it. Just like all my other build videos, I want to mention some alternative options that you guys have while leveling up. As you can see, this character that I'm playing is a Spore Warden main, but I just, slapped on Clawbringer, and then that's the build that I'm going to end up using. Right now, you can just pretend that the left side of my screen is Clawbringer. So if you are mainly a Clawbringer player and you're leveling up, for example, the unfortunate part about Clawbringer is that very early on into the tree, obviously I'm going to select this because that's what this build ends up being. Unfortunately, early on into the tree, you don't have a lot of things that increase your damage by a whole ton. You get some extra gun damage, you get some extra elemental damage, and then the rest of the stuff isn't all that good because it mainly is going to take advantage of a lot of synergies with its pets and its ability damage and all that sorts of stuff, which is hard to take advantage of in general. But early on with a suboptimal setup while leveling, it's going to be very difficult to take advantage of that. So while this may be not the thing that you want to hear right now, I would recommend while leveling up as a Clawbringer to literally just ignore this tree for a bit. Maybe you could get the extra gun damage and the extra fire damage for your Wyvern early on, and then pretty much as soon as you get a secondary character, I would recommend just speccing full into that character. What I think would probably be the best for leveling would be Spell Shot, because Spell Shot by default just has so much great stuff super early on into the tree, and just has a lot of things that are really good for it. There's also Stabomancer, I think, is pretty good. You might be wondering why not Spore Warden. Spore Warden mainly is going to take advantage of Play the Angles, Wrath of Nature, these sorts of things. We're going to get some extra gun damage and stuff early on, but the main reason that we're playing Spore Warden is that it has some really insane interactions later on into the game at max level. So early on while you're leveling, playing Spore Warden isn't going to help you out all that much. So that's why I'd recommend playing Spell Shot or playing Stabomancer. I have build videos for both of those characters for leveling, so if you're a Clawbringer, this is going to sound kind of weird, but I would recommend just watching those, and then when you pretty much capstone those characters, then I'd recommend going into like Oath of Fire for the extra gun damage, Dragon Aura for some extra elemental damage, and then some other stuff which we'll talk about once I actually end up filling out these trees. So first off, I'll just put the points into Oath of Fire and Dragon Aura because we're going to be playing those anyways, and I'll just put this other point here. We're going to spec this out a little bit more, but I just want to slap that in because I mean I may as well because I was mentioning it. So the rest of this build is pretty much just going to be how you end up wanting to play at max level. So sorry for those of you that are leveling up and still, you know, it's introductory for you. I would recommend just watching the other build videos. I'm sorry, it's a little counterintuitive. I will be working on, of course, like I mentioned earlier, on a primary Clawbringer setup, but Clawbringer is just at such a disadvantage with how its skill tree is set up. So that is my candid take on what I think that you guys should do. Anyway, the reason that we're playing Spore Warden is because Wrath of Nature paired with Play the Angles is extremely broken. Play the Angles can ricochet and hit upwards of like 4 million, so you could play Spore Warden plus pretty much any other character in the game and do really good damage. We're going to end up using Barrage here. The reason for Barrage is because of this enchant where anytime that you activate Barrage, you have a chance to deal a Poison Explosion. This Poison Explosion is pretty much just flat additional damage, and as you can see, when we proc it here, it just does a whole bunch of our damage. And it even is going to proc a poison status effect, etc. It's just really, really strong, and overall that's pretty much the main reason that we are going to be playing Spore Warden here. However, if you want to use one of the Clawbringer spells, you can totally do that and then just opt out for this enchant. This enchant does contribute to a large portion of your damage, but it isn't the main reason that this build is good. The main reason the build is good is just because of Play the Angles, and you just get so much base damage built into Spore Warden with Wrath of Nature and stuff. So in terms of how we want to actually end up getting to Wrath of Nature and Play the Angles, we're going to put some points into flat out gun damage here. And then we're going to max out Affinity, because this is going to increase our ability damage, which is then going to make our Play the Angles do a good bit more damage. Alternatively, you could easily do Spore Cloud for the Mushroom Taunt, or even Medicinal Mushroom to have your Mushroom heal you. The extra ability damage, like Play the Angles, if it ricochets properly, is going to do 4 million, which is a little overkill, right? So you don't entirely need all that extra ability damage, but big numbers are nice. Seeing enemies die in literally one hit is pretty cool. So I just like to go for the ability damage. And then the rest of the points you want to immediately put into Windrunner. That's going to give you fire rate and movement speed, which is pretty good. And then we're going to get increased mag size, which is overall just going to help our damage out a lot. Now, for the rest of the points, kind of up to you. If you don't really like using Barrage and you like using the Clawbringer skills, you could put some points into action skill cooldown rate so that the cooldowns for these are a bit faster. If you want a little bit more gun damage and you don't mind aiming down sight, Called Shot is not bad. The thing that I don't like about it is that it goes away the second that you stop aiming down sight, and I don't like to sit there for 10 seconds just to get some extra damage. This will make your boss killing potential a bit faster, but I don't really like playing around it. So for me, I just opt for the gun crit chance. Like I've explained in previous videos, this is multiplicative off of your base gun crit. Your base gun crit is very low, so ultimately this ends up being like a 2% increase in gun crit, which is pretty insignificant, especially on bosses, but hey, it's better than 0. So that's pretty much the main reason that I go for it. Then we're going to be maxing out Wrath of Nature. Wrath of Nature is going to proc whenever we use an ability on an enemy. So anytime that we fight a boss or any enemy with a lot of health, we shoot a barrage out on him, proc our enchant, and also we now do 100% increased damage to that enemy. And also Play the Angles is going to double dip with Wrath of Nature, increasing its own damage by a lot, and that's why it's able to hit for like 4 million, because it's going to scale off of all the extra damage dealt that you do, ability damage, and it's also going to scale off of gun damage and Wrath of Nature, and it seems to just double, triple, quadruple. Who knows how much it dips? Who's doing the math out here? It doesn't matter. 4 million damage is 4 million damage, so we want to take advantage of Wrath of Nature there, and also getting increases in the Clawbringer tree isn't all that ideal. This is pretty much going to be the highest damage that you can get. And then we get Headhunter, where we just deal 25% extra damage to crits. Have some extra points left over because we want to get to Play the Angles. I just slap it into crit, but like I mentioned before, you could do the res, the Spore Cloud taunt, or the extra action skill cooldown. It really doesn't matter all that much, kind of preference. Like I said, the gun crit is pretty negligible. Of course, in the Clawbringer, we're just going to get anything, pick up anything that increases our gun damage. But also in Clawbringer, what's pretty good for mobbing is, you know, we have Wrath of Nature, right, where we're going to deal extra damage, 100% extra damage to an enemy whenever they take damage from an ability. We can get some stuff in the Clawbringer tree that's going to deal ability damage with our Wyvern here, so that we don't actually have to barrage every individual enemy. Our Wyvern can just proc this on guys for us, and then we're going to have 100% extra damage on them almost all the time, so we don't have to run around barraging constantly every single enemy. We can have advantage of Wrath of Nature pretty often. So I went into the bonus gun damage and fire damage because it's 20%. And then elemental damage, which is actually isn't bad because it's on its own multiplier. It's pretty much just 20% damage, which is probably the best thing in the entire tree, if I'm being completely honest. Now, the rest of the stuff that I spec'd into, I think I went for the damage reduction here, and also you reflect a lightning ability damage, so we're going to be proccing Wrath of Nature with that reflection, but damage reduction is also just really nice for that extra survivability. And then I personally went into the 1 point of Firebolt, which is just going to increase our gun damage, and it's also going to make our Wyvern Companion shoot some firebolts at enemies. The damage for that isn't very good, but we get the extra 8% gun damage, which overall is just flat extra damage. And then I'm going to put 1 point into Storm Breath, which is honestly not all that great, but it gives us more damage reduction, and it's also going to do a little bit of lightning damage. Personally, not all that great, but it's just a little bit of extra damage reduction and a little bit of extra gun damage here. And then we're just going to put our last point into the damage reduction here, but you could go for any of the aforementioned, taunts, whatever. The other things that are within the tree here, dealing extra melee damage and your companion doesn't really matter. Getting increased ward is counterintuitive, unless you're not using the Cursed Wit, which we'll talk about shields in a second here, but we don't need that extra ward. And then the action skill cooldown rate based on remaining ward, we don't really care about our action skill cooldown rate, unless of course you are using one of the other abilities here. But we don't care for that, and we're also not going to have our ward active all that much, so that's not really going to help us. My cat is going to come to say hello. Alright, and then we're just going to put our last point into the damage reduction here, just because I feel like it, and we get a little bit extra lightning ability damage, but that's pretty insignificant. So as you can see, Clawbringer is kind of here just because. It's kind of just an option for you guys that are playing Clawbringer, and you don't really know what to do. You feel like you're kind of, screwed over. You kind of can just slap on Spore Warden and you'll do good regardless, and getting the extra damage here certainly isn't bad, but the stuff in the Clawbringer tree certainly is not nearly as good as the other characters. In terms of how we're going to be taking advantage of all of this, just talk about guns real quick. You want to be using an enchant like I mentioned before, where Spore Warden after activating Barrage, you get the 25% chance to deal the explosion, which does a crazy amount of damage and is extremely good. If you can't get this enchant, I'd recommend looking into another enchant that increases your damage dealt by 20%, but this is ultimately what you're going to be wanting to looking out for. But ultimately, this is what you're going to want to look out for. To fully take advantage of this, because it has a percent chance based on the amount of shots that you hit, ideally you want to look for a weapon that has really high fire rate, so the liquid cooling is going to be the best bet here, but you could also get something like a cryo weapon. These are particularly good for leveling as well, that's going to shoot in this pattern here. Any ×4 or ×5 variant is going to be what you're looking for, and then there's a whole bunch of other options. I have a video talking about the 10 best weapons in the game, so I'd recommend just watching that if you're interested, but any high fire rate weapon should work perfectly with this. It doesn't really matter if it's cryo or whatever. Any weapon is going to do elemental damage as long as it has an element attached to it. So that's pretty much the only thing that you care about, and it being high fire rate. In terms of your melee weapon, I always use a Goblin Pickaxe. Spell cooldown rate, movement speed, action skill cooldown rate, overall going to be really good. In terms of our spell, like every single gun build, we're going to be using Buffmeister here. This is just going to increase our base damage dealt, so overall we're just going to get a whole bunch of extra damage with this. If there's a spell that you like using particularly, you could go for that, but I like to use this one. And we also, because it's fire, I get a whole nother status effect, which is going to be pretty nice. And this is the only one that I've ever gotten in the game that has 2 spell charges, so we just get additional uptime on this for extra damage and the extra movement speed. In terms of our class item, like I showed you guys earlier, we're using one that's going to increase our Wrath of Nature. Unfortunately, this has Berserker power on it. We're not really benefiting, but getting extra Clawbringer power really isn't going to help us out all that much either. So Spore Warden power is kind of the only thing that we can care about, and getting Wrath of Nature is one of the only things that we care about too. Some other options for you, probably increasing Dragon Aura's damage wouldn't be all that bad. I don't really know of anything else within this tree that would be all that beneficial. Maybe a class item with Awe on it wouldn't be all that bad, but honestly, Wrath of Nature is probably the best bet that you can get. And then alternative rolls on this, just fire rate, gun damage, all damage dealt, movement speed just cuz. Getting the crit chances reduced but crit damage is increased is really good for bosses, not as great for mobbing, but ultimately this is an extremely good class item, and I'd recommend getting something with Wrath of Nature on it. This could be a better roll, but ultimately it's still pretty good. In terms of your shield, any damage build, almost any build in the game, you want to be using Cursed Wit. Whenever you drop your ward, you're going to deal 100% increased damage. For our neck here, this one is actually particularly interesting, especially for mobbing with the Spore Warden plus the Clawbringer. As you can see, I just have poison damage and Spore Warden power, which is going to buff the damage that I do with my liquid cooling with the enchant here. Alternatively, you could get gun damage and Spore Warden, or you could get frost damage and Spore Warden, and all of those wouldn't be bad either. I like it because I have gun mag size, which helps with my liquid cooling. But what's really interesting is at the bottom here, Fate Maker crits increase companion crit chance, and then whenever my companions get crits, I get extra crit damage. This is probably one of the only necks that is actually going to work with this build to enable us to get a little bit more damage in terms of like what you can get on the subtext of the neck, because we have two companions, right? And we're going to be hitting crits a lot, so increasing our companion crit by 80% is pretty helpful, so then they can get some more crits, and our Wyvern's going to do a whole bunch of different type of damage, so he can often get crits pretty easily, increasing our crit damage by 30%, so that's certainly not bad. And then lastly, for our rings, we just have increased gun damage. Pistol crit damage is nice because I'm using a liquid cooling, and then while ward is not full, effects are increased, so 34% gun damage twice, so 60% extra gun damage. Overall, really strong. The action skill cooldown rate isn't all that great here. I would prefer to have something like all damage dealt, if possible. Alternatively, dealing damage to a boss increased effects is also a really strong one there, because you can just max out the extra gun damage. But that's pretty much it for the build. In terms of what else you would want on your neck, potentially, anything like all damage dealt, status effect damage, mag size, reload speed if you're using a gun that isn't the liquid cooling. There's a whole bunch of options here, but those are the ones that I would recommend. Now I'm just going to show you guys some gameplay of Chaos Level 20 so you can see how the build functions. Forgot to talk about enchants yet again. My brain is a little slow today because unfortunately on my birthday I got food poisoning, so I'm still a little bit recovering from that. But overall, for the enchants, like obviously mentioned, we want the Spore Warden one. An alternative to that is on action skill start, increase damage dealt by 20%. This is its own multiplier, so flat 20% extra damage pretty much all the time. And then any on action skill active is currently bugged, where whenever we use our action skill, this is going to apply to us for 60 seconds, so the extra elemental damage is huge here. And then paired with that, we have action skill active, increase frost damage. If you can't find a frost damage one, or you can't find elemental damage, you could do frost and poison, assuming that you're using the Spore Warden thing, because the extra poison damage is actually fairly good, because we're getting a lot of poison damage through this enchant here. And then lastly, I have on action skill start, increase gun damage by 40%. You could very easily swap that one for on action skill start, increase damage dealt. I think that is a little bit better, because this one is going to scale your play the angles, while the gun damage I don't think will, but it's really hard to know for sure. Overall though, all those are really good options. If you are still, early on into the game and you don't have a lot of enchants, or you don't have a lot of perfect ones, alternative options would be like on spellcast, increase your damage dealt by a little bit if you're using a spell with a low cooldown, or on action skill start, increase status effect chance and damage if you're using a weapon that has a lot of status effect damage. Alternatively, that's kind of the only ones that you want to go for. The on action skill ones are just really good if you're using like a weapon that's maybe dark magic or fire damage. On action skill start, 50% extra damage is literally the best thing that you can get, because it's 50% damage, right? And that's overall really good. So yeah, that's what I would recommend for enchants. Alright, let's hop into a Chaos 20 so you guys can see how the build functions. But pretty much like any other Spore Warden build, you kind of just run around and kill stuff. This one is a little disadvantaged relative to the other setups because, you're playing Clawbringer and the skill tree isn't as good. But it doesn't really matter if you're playing Spore Warden, your damage is going to be really, really good regardless, especially with this weapon choice. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I am going to try to find a setup that is going to mainly be, Clawbringer. It's going to take me a bit to set it up. There's a lot of different options that you have, but right there, as you can see, that my Wyvern hit that guy, and then I benefited from Wrath of Nature, so that's something that's a little nice about this. Nice having the Wyvern run around and do stuff. If you guys have tested anything with Clawbringer and you would like me to try it out, again, feel free to let me know. I'm really looking for... Oh, I just killed myself with the barrage. I'm really looking for some different forms of setups. There's a lot of different things that I'm interested in trying when it comes to Clawbringer. If I want to do like... I don't know if I want to do like a full companion setup, or if I want to do a more ability-based one. It seems to be a little bit difficult to scale both of those, and that's probably why most people are having difficulty when it comes to Claw. There's also some status effect ones I've heard of, maybe using like Livewire, some stuff with Stabmancer. But yeah, I mean, not a whole lot to say. This floor was kind of boring. Hopefully we get a better one I just like to show you guys the raw gameplay, because then, you know, you see that there's no funny business going on or anything, that the build is like actually good. If I was just editing in kills and stuff, I don't really like the idea that you can't see how it functions just in normal play. So I just like showing you guys that, you know, you can just hop in and just start doing damage. Nothing weird going on. You can just run around and just kill stuff. I mean, as you can see, the damage is pretty good. I feel a little bad every time that I do this, because, I mean, the gameplay is just me waiting for things to spawn a lot of the time, and then I look at them and they just die. So that's kind of why I like putting like the boss kills and stuff in the intro. But yeah, you just kill stuff, you know. I don't know what else to say. I would love to make this a little more entertaining than it is, but it's hard. It's hard when there's such little mob density in these chaos chambers. This floor should be fairly decent for gameplay. On a completely separate note, there's a lot of builds that I want to try, and I don't really know which one I want to do first. So let me know which build you guys I think I should do first. I can't speak English. I'm interested in trying a Dark Magic Spell Shot. Well, I've kind of started to set this one up. A Dark Magic Spell Shot Graveborn build. I know how to make a Spell Shot melee build. There's a build using Stabomancer where I can get 100% uptime in the shadows, and kind of more of a gun damage build, which I think will be pretty good too. A lot of different ones I'm interested in trying. I really don't know which one I want to do first. There was another one, probably just whatever the Clawbringer setup would end up being. Can't remember what the other one would be. Oh yeah, I want to do a Spell Shot build that's just spells. No guns or anything like that, literally just spamming spells. I don't know, there's a lot of options, and I don't really know what I want to lean toward. I also want to make a video, another one, talking about which legendaries I think are the best, which weapons, because I've since tested out some more weapons. If you guys have any recommendations for legendary weapons I should use, feel free to leave it down in the comments, and I'll make another video talking about that. I'm gonna be honest, these chaos chambers kind of make me miss like Expeditions and Outriders, because the gameplay there is just like, you know, something's constantly happening. I don't know how long I'm gonna complain about chaos chambers in this game until they attempt to fix it, but a lot of the time I feel like I'm just waiting. I wish that I could just start a chaos chamber and just do it in 7 minutes and just have that be the gameplay, but they're so slow sometimes that, you know, there's not really a whole lot happening, and I feel like it's necessary for me to edit it. I don't want the video to be super long either. I don't want there to be like 15 minutes of chaos chamber gameplay. I really think they should introduce... Well, I accidentally made the level elite. I've been playing my Graveborn too much. I didn't mean to do that. Whatever, I guess I can show you guys the elite. The elite enemy killing. I wish there was a playlist that was just like quick runs, so I could just quickly hop in here, not get any like buffs or anything crazy, and just run around and kill stuff. And then I'd get the boss fight a lot faster too. That would be certainly that would be preferable for me. But as you can see, yep, goodbye, sir. Even on level 46 elites, you still just decimate everything. So there is a build for the Clawbringer, boys. It just isn't really a Clawbringer. You're a Spore Warden that you know, has some extra damage and has a Wyvern companion. Alright, we're at the boss floor. I accidentally have been making things elite, so they'll be a little bit harder. Oh no, not the Dragon Lord, dude. I really don't like fighting this guy. Alright, well, you know, if you were fighting a boss like Enchants or whatever, he kind of dies instantly. This guy, I don't know, I haven't fought him with this build. I imagine he dies fairly quickly still. But, gonna TP away. Yeah, I mean, he still kind of gets owned. I'm not hitting all that many crits, so we're not getting a whole bunch of poison explosions, and if you get unlucky, like I didn't get a single play the angles proc there. If you get a play the angles proc, it'll just instantly phase him, but I mean the damage is still really good there. He's ticking away just from status effect damage there, which is pretty good. I just died to nothing, so you know that's pretty cool. People are gonna comment, well, you actually died to the frost that you ran into. Listen, it was nothing, okay? It was nothing. Now we're just gonna run around. Alright, the boss is damageable again. I edited the rest of it. I didn't even Wrath of Nature him, but it's fine. It's fine, he'll get rolled anyways. Didn't even proc a Barrage or Wrath of Nature him. Okay. Okay, no problem. I wish this boss fight wasn't so long. Hit him with a little Wrath of Nature. A little Barrage Action. I mean, the damage is there, boys. The damage is there. This is the part of the fight that I really dislike. The main thing that I dislike is how long it is. And that you can't, like, speed it up. I wish if you could just do enough damage to just one-phase him. That would make me happy. But beggars cannot be choosers, I suppose. Alright. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really notice the damage reduction with this setup all that much. You seem to kind of just get one-shotted from things just as often, which is a little bit unfortunate. I really think they should put health gating in this game. Maybe it didn't need it in Borderlands 3, I don't really know. But certainly feels like it needs to be here. But yeah, there's the Dragon Lord, level 43 owned. So that's pretty much it for the build. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys later. Again, let me know what builds you'd like to see in the comments, and if you guys have any information or recommendations for this build.